Alright, now that our grid is set up, we have some of our buildings established here. Now we can make more buildings as we go as well, so if I don't like these buildings, I don't need to use these. Again, I may want to make some more. I'm going to say minimum right now is probably going to be somewhere around 6. We'll kind of see what that looks like because we'll be able to reuse some of those buildings and change their sizes. So what I want to do now is go ahead and put these buildings in. First thing I need to know is that I got to switch from this perspective grid tool over to the perspective selection tool. So I held my mouse on there and then I switched over to that tool. You almost have to ignore the selection tool because if you use this tool as opposed to this tool to move things around, it's going to kind of mess things up. So that's something off the bat to kind of understand. You have to be very conscious of which of these tools that you're using. It's hard because you're so used to using the selection tool. Well, now you're going to need to use this one quite a bit. So first thing we're going to do, we need to select one of these symbols and bring it into our project. So I'm just going to take this first building I made and just drag a piece onto my project. So there's my building. Now I'm going to use this widget and I need to decide where do I want the darker sides of my buildings to be. Think about the light source. This project's going to take some critical thinking. If I decide that the light is kind of coming from the direction of this orange one, I want to keep all my dark blue buildings on this side. And then all the light blue ones will be on this side. Now that doesn't mean the orange and the blue. It's kind of a little more confusing then, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So first, let's just do the blue side is going to be my dark blue ones. The orange side is going to be my light blue ones in my case. So I'm going to go dark blue. I'm going to use this perspective selection tool, and as soon as I start moving it, it instantly moves it into perspective. And again, if you notice, what makes this look kind of right is the fact that the horizontal lines all point to this dot right here. If I use this tool and change the size of this thing, they all adjust automatically and still point at this dot. Now here's where you can get mixed up. If I switch over to this tool and I adjust the size of this, they no longer point at the right spot. This one's kind of pointing out this way, this one's in another random spot, so they're kind of like all pointing to somewhere else. So I have to be very careful of that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the other side of this building. So here is the opposite part of that first building that I made. So I have dark building one, like, I'm going to go ahead and drag this one in. I need to go back to this perspective selection tool. I'm going to go to this other side of the widget. And now I'm going to go ahead and drag this one into perspective. And then what I can do is I could zoom in and make sure that I align these things. And I would need to kind of continue playing here to make sure that these guys are perfectly lined up. But you get the idea. The more I zoom into, the more accurate I can make that. And you can see my first building here, I kind of messed up. I need to go back and change this because I have a black stroke on all of these items. So you can go back and change symbols. The way that you do that, you just double click on a symbol and it kind of opens it up in isolation mode. And now I can take all this and just tell it I didn't want that to have a stroke. And now when I double click elsewhere to get out of isolation mode, this symbol updates over here. So that's what's kind of neat about symbols. So I'm going to do the same thing to this one. I don't double click on this. That's just like an instance of the symbol. Actually, no, it looks like that will work. That'll edit the actual symbol itself. So if I had two of these buildings, these exact same buildings somewhere, on my project, it's going to update both of these is basically what it's telling me. It was asking me, or am I sure I want to do that? So because I'm inside of this group now, I'm going to have to select all of these. And again, I could do that select same thing that I showed you earlier, but that's just as quick for in this case. And there we go. So now I don't have any issues with that. If for some reason my horizon line was way, way higher, or my building was super, super small, here's my horizon line here, this green line that runs from dot to dot. If my building happened to be lower than that somehow, I would have to draw the roof of it. Now in this case, we don't need to because we are standing, our eyes are here. We can't see the top of the building because it's so far above us. So that building is done. So I'm going to go ahead now, back to my symbols, and take out another building. I'm going to put this building, I'm going to say over here. So I'm going to need that one, and I'm going to need that one. Regardless of what side I kind of put these on, this side of the building needs to be the dark side. So I'm going to go ahead and do this one. And I'm going to put a little bit of space in between these buildings as well. Now I'm kind of trying to line up the ground, but I'm putting some space between these because if you think about it, two buildings in real life would not touch each other. Now here's where this gets kind of where I said like the blue and the orange kind of confuse you. If I take this one, I'm going to switch the widget to the other side. Even though I'm going to be over in this section, this blue side of this grid, I need to use this light blue part because I'm drawing this side of the building. So I'm going to go ahead now, again using my perspective selection tool, and I'm going to drag that one over into perspective. Now obviously this needs size changed, and again it's very important that I use this perspective selection tool. So again, if I zoom in, I can get this lined up just right. I may need to make both of these smaller to make them fit on my page. These are probably much too large. So as I start aligning this, now I understand it's covering up that other building right now, and that's okay. We're going to fix that in a moment. I'm going to leave this actually the size it is just for the sake of making this quick. What happened is this needs to be behind this other building. So I can do that in my layers, or I can also just right click and do arrange, send to back. That's the same as me dragging it down in my layers. So now this building is on top of the other one. When I click away, it looks right. And again, basically all you have to think about is what direction is the light coming from. If the light is hitting these sides of the building and that's what's making that look light, I need to be consistent with that. Even though I'm on this blue side of the grid, I'm still sometimes doing the lighter colors, sometimes I'm doing the darker colors. You can't just go by the color of the grid. All right? So add in your buildings. You can change the size of them. You want to do, like I said, at least 6 buildings. Don't be afraid to put some behind others. You can make new buildings. Try to do as much variety as possible. If we look back at that artist sample, you can see they have much different sizes and shapes. That variety is what makes this thing interesting. What you have to keep in mind is that different artists, different architects come up with different designs kind of to put their own stamp on things. So if everything looked the same, it wouldn't look real. These buildings were all built at different times by different people for different purposes, so everything has its own little variety and difference to it.